You picture a medieval castle, and you see knights, feasts, and stone walls so thick an army couldn't break them. But here's what nobody tells you. Those same walls that kept enemies out also trapped the cold inside. The people who lived there weren't freezing to death, but not for the reasons you think. This is the story of the invisible insulation, the secret methods that kept medieval lords alive through winters that would kill us today. And by the end, you'll realize we've forgotten more about staying warm than we ever learned from central heating. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth. Castles weren't built to be lived in. They were built to survive sieges. Every design choice, every architectural feature, was a calculation of defense over comfort. Those magnificent stone walls that still stand centuries later, they're thermal nightmares. Stone absorbs cold. It holds it. It radiates it back into every room like a slow, patient enemy that never sleeps. Walk into a castle ruin today in summer and you'll feel the chill. Now imagine January. Imagine sleet hammering those walls. Imagine wind screaming through arrow slits designed to let soldiers shoot out but never designed to keep weather from shooting in. Glass was a luxury most castles never saw. The wealthy might afford small panes for a chapel, but your average castle window was an open hole with wooden shutters, sometimes oiled cloth or parchment stretched across frames, and a constant whisper of cold air bleeding through. So how did they survive? The answer isn't what you'd expect. They didn't try to heat the air. That was a losing battle from the start. Instead, they heated the body. They built layers between themselves and the cold, and they built those layers everywhere. Let me tell you about the best-kept secret in medieval architecture. You've seen them in every castle illustration. Tapestries, huge woven scenes covering stone walls from floor to ceiling. You probably thought they were just decoration, displays of wealth and status. They were. But they were something else too. When you hang a tapestry against a stone wall, you create a gap. Air gets trapped in that space. That trapped air becomes a buffer zone, a pocket of stillness between the frozen stone and the living space. It's the same principle we use in modern double-pane windows. Medieval nobles stumbled onto insulation by accident while showing off their money, but the real genius was what they wore. We think of medieval clothing as costumes, but every piece had a purpose. Start with linen against the skin. It wicks moisture, keeps sweat from turning cold against your body. Over that, wool. Multiple layers of wool. Wool stays warm even when wet, traps heat, breathes in ways that modern synthetics still can't match. Then fur on top for the wealthy. Fur-lined cloaks, fur-trimmed hoods, and here's what matters. They protected the extremities obsessively. Thick wool hose for legs. Leather boots lined with fur or stuffed with straw. Gloves, mittens, layers on the hands. Hoods that covered the head and neck completely, because they understood what we've measured with science. You lose massive amounts of heat through your head and neck. They dressed like this indoors. Let that sink in. Inside their own homes, they wore what we'd consider outdoor winter gear. Now let's talk about fire. The Great Hall, the heart of any castle, had a central hearth. Open flame right in the middle of the room. Smoke rising up to a louver in the ceiling, some of it escaping, much of it not. Your eyes would water, your throat would burn, but you'd be warm. Well, one side of you would be warm. The side facing the fire would roast while your back froze. People would rotate like meat on a spit, turning to heat themselves evenly. And here's where social hierarchy became literally visible. The closer you sat to the fire, the more important you were. The lord and his family near enough to feel the heat on their faces. Lesser nobles, a bit further back. Servants and workers at the edges, catching whatever warmth made it through the crowd. The fire wasn't just heat. It was light, it was the kitchen, it was the social center. Life revolved around it because life depended on it. But in a moment you'll see why the Great Hall Fire wasn't the full story. For private chambers, they used braziers. Metal containers filled with charcoal or hot coals, carried from room to room like portable campfires. You could move heat where you needed it. Sounds perfect, right? Except braziers killed people. Not from burns, though that happened, from invisible poison. Carbon monoxide building up in enclosed spaces. There's no way to know how many people went to sleep next to a warm brazier and simply never woke up. They didn't understand suffocation by gas. They just knew that sometimes people died in their sleep in winter, and they accepted it as God's will or bad luck. The castle fire itself was its own hazard. One spark landing in straw bedding, one knocked-over candle, and stone walls that couldn't burn suddenly became an oven, trapping people inside while timber roofs and wooden floors turned into infernos above them. Fire wasn't just survival, it was a gamble every single day. Which brings us to the bedroom. Specifically, the canopy bed. You've seen them. 4 posts, heavy curtains that close on all sides, creating what amounts to a fabric box around the mattress. We think of them as status symbols, and they were. But they were also survival technology. Close those curtains and you've created a microclimate, your body heat, trapped in that enclosed space, warms the air around you. It's a fortress within a fortress. Some would place a warming pan under the covers first. A long-handled pan filled with hot coals, run between the sheets to knock the chill off before climbing in. Others used heated stones wrapped in cloth, hot vessels made of ceramic or metal, tucked at the feet, and they didn't sleep alone unless they had no choice. Servants slept multiple to a bed. Even nobles shared beds with spouses, children, sometimes trusted attendants. Body heat multiplies when you're pressed together. Privacy was a luxury they sacrificed for warmth, but the real secret was inside them. Food as fuel. Medieval people understood this instinctively. Your body is a furnace that runs on calories. They ate heavy, stews thick with fat and meat, bread soaked in grease, ale and wine and hot spiced drinks. They craved fat in winter because fat burns slow and keeps you warm from the inside. Spices weren't just for flavor or preserving meat. Ginger, pepper, cinnamon, they make you feel warmer. They don't actually raise your body temperature, but they increase blood flow, create a sensation of internal heat. It's psychological and physiological at once. Then there's the human factor we forget. They were adapted. Born into this, raised in it, bodies calibrated to function in conditions that would hospitalize us. But even they had limits. In the deepest winter, the castle contracted. People abandoned the great hall after dark, retreated to smaller chambers where fewer people and less space meant warmth concentrated. They sealed off entire wings, lived in a fraction of the castle's footprint until spring. Movement was survival too. Sitting still meant freezing, so they worked, they walked, they kept their blood moving. Some castle designs showed real cleverness. Chambers on the south side of the building caught whatever weak winter sun existed. Northern rooms became storage. buffer zones between the living spaces and the prevailing winds. Kitchens were placed strategically so their heat would bleed into adjacent rooms. Thick interior walls separated chambers, creating layers of insulation through stone and air. Even the floors played a part. We think of castle floors as bare stone, cold and hard. Some were, but most were covered in rushes, straw, reeds cut and scattered across the floor in thick layers. They insulated from the ground cold, absorbed spills, and trapped smells. The smells were real. Sweat and smoke and bodies packed together, and food waste and animal dung tracked in from the courtyard. Fresh rushes helped. Sometimes they'd mix in herbs, lavender or sweet woodruff, crushed underfoot to release scent. But mostly it was about creating a barrier between human feet and frozen stone. And then, slowly, things changed. The fireplace happened. Instead of an open hearth, flooding the room with heat and smoke, someone figured out how to build a fire against a wall, with a chimney to pull smoke up and out. This wasn't medieval innovation. This came later in the period. But once it spread, it transformed castle life. Rooms got clearer. Eyes stopped watering. Heat became directable. You could have smaller, more private rooms with their own fireplaces. Comfort increased. The great communal hall began to matter less. Privacy became possible. But for most of the medieval period, for the centuries we romanticize in movies and stories, none of that existed. People lived in smoke and cold and damp. They wore layers until they looked twice their actual size. They huddled around fires and rationed heat like a resource under siege. And they survived. Here's what we've lost. Not the specific techniques. We don't need those. We've lost the understanding that comfort is a negotiation. That warmth is something you build through a dozen small strategies, not one magic solution. Medieval people didn't have thermostats. They had knowledge. They understood how heat moves through space, through bodies, through fabric and stone. They knew their own biology. They knew that survival wasn't about controlling the environment. It was about adapting to it with every tool and trick available. So the next time you adjust your thermostat without thinking, consider what it took to stay alive in a castle winter. Consider the tapestries hiding pockets of air, the servants rotating near the fire, the child sleeping pressed against siblings for warmth, the lord in his fur-lined cloak sitting close enough to the brazier that sparks land on his boots. The invisible insulation they created through layers and knowledge and sheer determined stubbornness. Would you have survived a winter in a medieval castle? Could you build warmth out of wool and smoke and shared body heat? Think about it. Then let me know in the comments what surprised you most about how they stayed warm. And if you want more myths shattered about medieval life, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started.